Shiki was just a regular lazy delinquent, recently expelled from school, but when a mysterious stranger attacks him and kills his father, he discovers the hard way that demon blood runs through his veins. Now, fueled by revenge, he decides to master his newfound powers. At the very beginning, the story speaks of an event that occurred long ago, involving a being known as an onin, who reveled in massacring humans and destroying everything in its path. However, one human decided to oppose this wave of slaughter, confronting the creatures head-on. This human was Momotaro, who invaded Onigashima Island and defeated countless onis. Yet this was merely the start of the war between Momotaro and the onis. Meanwhile, a boy named Shiki chats with a friend on the phone, mentioning his recent expulsion from school. Suddenly, Tsuyoshi, his adoptive father, arrives, punching the boy on the head and complaining about the expulsion. He asks what happened, and Shiki grumbles about his father's concern, saying no one cares about such things. Tsuyoshi then notices Shiki's room is full of weapons and calls him out on it, stating their establishment is for drinks, not weapons. Hearing his father complain about his excessive weapons, Shiki retorts, pointing out his father's dwindling clientele. Tsuyoshi tells him to stay out of adult business. However, Shiki mocks him further, seeing that Tsuyoshi considers himself a true adult. Hearing this, Tsuyoshi reminds him that Shiki is just a recently expelled rebel who feels all-powerful. Shiki prolongs the argument, saying he would never end up like his father. He also expresses relief at not having any blood relation to Tsuyoshi. In the middle of their argument, the store's phone rings. Tsuyoshi answers the phone, handling the store's sales. Meanwhile, Shiki, trying to relieve stress, plays with one of his many weapons. Suddenly, he hears a crash from his window and rushes to see what it is. Shiki is then captured by a mysterious being who surprisingly knows his name. Out of nowhere, Tsuyoshi runs over the guy and extends his hand to Shiki, telling him to get in the car. During the drive, Tsuyoshi tells Shiki they'll probably need to flee the country for peace. Shiki assumes his father owes money to someone dangerous, but still scolds him for running someone over. Tsuyoshi defends himself, saying the guy isn't dead, which is enough for him. Shiki argues, believing the hit was fatal. Seeing his son still doesn't understand, Tsuyoshi tells him to pay attention, as he won't repeat himself. Tsuyoshi then reveals Shiki is an Oni descendant, and the pursuer is a Momotaro descendant, there to find him. Despite Tsuyoshi's seriousness, Shiki remains suspicious, thinking his father is joking. Tsuyoshi understands Shiki's disbelief, as the revelation is shocking. Suddenly, the pursuer infiltrates the car, blocking Tsuyoshi's view of the road and attacking them from inside until a tire bursts. They abandon the car and continue on foot, but the car explodes out of nowhere. Tsuyoshi loses sight of Shiki. Meanwhile, the man pursuing them finally catches Shiki. He introduces himself as Samidare Momoya, a collaborator of the Momotaro Agency, whose goal is to eradicate all Onis from the face of the earth, believing their blood is a plague on humanity. Samidare explains the millennia-old rivalry between Momotaro and the Onis. Momotaro's descendants united to form the agency, while Onis hid among humans to avoid being hunted. Suddenly, Tsuyoshi reappears. Samidare attacks him, and during the fight, Tsuyoshi recognizes the black nerve forming Samidare's sword, a unique trait of Momotaro descendants. Samidare, in turn, recognizes Tsuyoshi as his master, noting how much older they've both gotten, and calls him by an old name, used when Tsuyoshi belonged to the Momotaro Agency. Hearing this, Shiki discovers his father was once a Momotaro, which astounds him, as he never knew. Meanwhile, Tsuyoshi keeps insisting his name has changed, adopted after leaving the agency. But Samidare says he remains a Momotaro, even if he changed his name. Besides, Samidare reminds him that Onis are very dangerous, something he should know. And since he was responsible for harboring an Oni, Samidare decides to eliminate him as well, as punishment for his betrayal of the agent. Hearing this, Tsuyoshi gets even more irritated and attacks him. Meanwhile, Shiki remains trapped by the black nerve and is confused by everything happening, as in his mind, none of it makes the slightest sense. During the confrontation, Samidare tries to understand why Tsuyoshi protected the Oni all that time, but in the end, he finds no answer to his question, so he decides to end the confrontation by killing Tsuyoshi with his blade. Seeing this, Shiki desperately screams at his father's death and promises he will kill Samidare. But suddenly, Tsuyoshi grabs Samidare's foot, showing he's still alive. Seeing him still trying to protect Shiki, Samidare questions why again. Tsuyoshi replies he doesn't need a good reason to protect a rebellious son, as it's obvious he'd do anything for his child. He also makes it clear that Shiki never hurt anyone or did anything wrong. Tsuyoshi reprimands Samidare for being willing to kill an innocent boy just for the blood in his veins. Samidare tells him to shut up. However, Tsuyoshi continues, asking Samidare if he would dare touch his son with those same murderous hands. Samidare again tells Tsuyoshi to shut up, then prepares his blade to finish him off. As for Shiki, he feels utterly useless, just watching the scene without being able to do anything to stop it. Moreover, he remembers that he was the one who should have died there, not his father. As he recalls what Samidare did to his father, Shiki begins to enter a state of fury and promises again that he will kill Samidare. At this, Shiki finally manages to free himself from the dark nerves and attacks. Seeing that scene, Samidare notices that he has awakened Shiki's true form. And with that, he explains that Onis usually fight by manipulating blood. However, Samidare believes that this is not the most frightening part of Onis, because the most terrifying part of them is that when Onis enter a state of fury, they are uncontrollable and savage beings, something that completely takes away their humanity. And as they return to combat, Samidare begins to breathe with difficulty until he suddenly receives a blow from Shiki that makes him lose a lot of blood. And after the attack, Shiki finally returns to normal and looks at his blood-stained hands. He doesn't understand what just happened. And with that, Samidare explains that he just entered a typical state of confusion after losing his memory when he returned to his normal state. And seeing Shiki apparently scared of his own appearance, Samidare reassures him by saying that he will kill him so that he can end his suffering and all that fear. As a result, he will also follow the Momotaro Code of Ethics, eradicating all Onis from the face of the earth. Having said that, he attacks Shiki and tries to attack him. However, Tsuyoshi gets in between the two and takes the attack in his son's place. And seeing that Tsuyoshi defended Shiki even after seeing what he is capable of, Samidare notes that he will follow through with it to the bitter end, so he decides to leave the place for now, and Shiki is left alone with his father, who lies in his arms already fainting. However, he asks to say something to the boy one last time, so he begins by apologizing for having hidden so many things. After all, the consequences of the omission generated a great internal conflict in the boy. And with that, Tsuyoshi explains that Shiki can be killed simply for having the blood he has. Precisely for this reason, it didn't make much sense. Tsuyoshi ended up neglecting to give him this information. And having said that, he asks Shiki to get stronger so he can better deal with these adversities that will start to come his way from now on. However, he must be strong enough to defeat Momotaro and the Onis, because that way he will be able to live without anyone trying to take away his happiness. And hearing this, Shiki tells his father to shut up and says that he didn't ask him to give a dramatic speech at the end of his life. And besides, Shiki makes it clear that he wants to say more to him. However, seeing this, Tsuyoshi says that he would like to see the Onis and Momotaros living in harmony, just like the two of them. But right after saying that, Tsuyoshi falls lifeless from Shiki's arms. The boy starts arguing with his father one last time, saying he was going to apologize for saying he was happy they weren't truly related. He then starts calling for Tsuyoshi repeatedly, hoping for a response. But in the end, he receives only silence and begins to cry for not having had the opportunity to say everything he wanted to his father. After composing himself, Shiki gently lays his father's head on the ground. Suddenly, a random man appears behind the boy and slaps him on the back of the neck, knocking him out instantly. Meanwhile, a group of men in a room criticize Samidar's poor performance on his mission, as well as the fact that he acted alone without their help. They note that Samidara completely ruined Momotaro's reputation, making them a weaker institution. Furthermore, one of the men expresses concern about the possibility of the public becoming aware of their existence, because if that happens, they will discover the existence of Onus by extension. And in their view, it is not necessary for the general public to know that the impure blood of Onus still circulates in people who walk among them. I didn't want to say anything, but the discourse of these Momotaro guys is a bit strange, isn't it? Meanwhile, the man who captured Shiki calls a teammate to inform him that he has brought another member to their group, but will still need time to better assess the boy's abilities. And so, after all that chaos, discovering he has Oni blood, Shiki dreams of his father being killed. He wakes up, looks to the side, and notices a suspicious man doing upside-down exercises. Naito tells him he was waiting for Shiki to wake up to explain what's going on. He reveals he's also an Oni, just like Shiki, and what's more, he says his father's body is safe elsewhere. As for Shiki, he was brought here for evaluation and recruitment. Naito deduces Shiki saw a man capable of manipulating black mist before passing out. He then reveals that Guy was one of the Momotaros, an organization aiming to kill all Onis. Naito says he's looking for hidden Onis like Shiki to evaluate and invite them into the Oni organization. Having explained everything, Naito removes the gag from Shiki's mouth, allowing him to ask any question he wants. But first, Shiki complains to Naito, telling him to untie him completely, and he also asks about his father, making it clear he'll exterminate Naito if he harms his family. Hearing this, Naito calmly reassures him that his father is safe. After all, if he had truly been hurt, Naito wouldn't have even mentioned it, so he calls Shiki dumb for not figuring that out. Feeling he wasted a second of his life on such a dumb question, Naito starts berating Shiki, who, in turn, says he doesn't trust him. Naito, realizing he's wasting time, asks if Shiki has more questions before the evaluation. Shiki, still yelling like a retard, just wants to be released. Naito, however, points out that Shiki's losing points with him. After all, he shows himself to be a very violent guy, which keeps him tied up. Seeing that he's losing points as he talks, Shiki gets even more irritated and asks what exactly these points mean. Naito reminds him he's under evaluation, so each of his actions can increase or decrease his points. Hearing this, Shiki finally gets, and although he doesn't know what's happening, he decides to start speaking more calmly, showing some emotional control. He takes a deep breath and, for the third time, asks to be released, trying to sound more chill. But after a few seconds of interaction, he goes back to showing his true nature, calling Naito trash. As for Naito, he notes that for eccentric people like Shiki, his evaluation usually won't work, so he puts Shiki in a headlock, making him lose his breath until he almost died. This way, Naito can see Shiki's true nature, which is only revealed when they're close to death. While being choked, Shiki starts losing his strength and feels like he's really going to die if he doesn't do something. However, he loses consciousness without being able to do anything to free himself. Seeing that the kid really couldn't handle it, Naito is disappointed and says Shiki was indeed just an idiot. However, the blood dripping from the kid's hand starts to take a form and attacks Naito, who, in turn, gives Shiki minus 100 points, because besides entering a state of frenzy and losing total control, Shiki also doesn't know how to control his blood properly. Therefore, Naito says he'll show them the correct way to use their blood later, although Shiki won't remember anything after that. As for Shiki, he attacks Naito again, who tells him to be careful because Shiki could end up causing a fatal injury to someone careless, which is not the case for Naito, as he is prepared to face any enemy appear. With that, Naito knocks Shiki, and when he wakes up, he notices his arm all bloody and doesn't understand what happened. Naito explains that Oni blood is so powerful that it's difficult to control, especially for someone who doesn't yet master their own power. As for frenzy, Naito says that after an Oni suffers from this phenomenon, they end up losing their memory and then wake up with everything around them destroyed. Meanwhile, Shiki still doesn't understand any and asks Naito to stop talking about such complicated things. Furthermore, He tries to argue that Naito also is manipulating his blood. Hearing Naito is surprised by Shiki's stupidity with all that power, and says that in his case, he is just manipulating his own blood, which is totally different from entering a frenzy. As for Shiki, even without fully understanding what is being said, he at least understands that Naito is a very powerful individual. Therefore, Shiki swallows his pride and asks subordinate as he aims to become stronger and stronger to avenge his father's death. But seeing the way he asks for such a thing, Naito refuses his request and says that in a battle, he who does not use his brain is doomed to walk towards death. Therefore, Naito says he doesn't need a useless person like Shiki. And seeing that he continues to be humiliated, even on his Shiki begins to turn red with it. As for Naito, he tries to capture the boy to prevent him from continuing to roam free, destroying everything. But realizing Naito's intention, Shiki starts running around the place hoping to shake him up, and Naito notices that the boy is slowly entering despair. So he advises him to keep his guard up, and suddenly Shiki takes advantage of Naito being apparently distracted and tries to attack him, going all out. However, Naito observes every movement of the boy in slow motion, then creates 4 different attack options that Shiki can use to hit him. But as soon as Shiki attacks him, Naito is caught by surprise, because the boy didn't use any of the 4 movements Naito had thought of from the beginning. But even though he was caught off guard, Naito manages to reverse Shiki's attack, who in turn partially enters frenzy. Thus, Naito confirms that the boy is indeed a complete useless. Shiki disputes, saying that he has not yet lost control completely. But as soon as he manages to reverse the state of frenzy, Shiki falls to the ground, tired. Naito is surprised by it because controlling the state of frenzy is not something anyone could do. Therefore, Naito believes that this was not a mere stroke of luck, so he asks how the boy managed to do. However, Shiki refuses to tell him secret for free. After all, Naito must accept him as his subordinate, and only then will he have access to any information he wants. Hearing this, Naito says he can consider his case, and Shiki, even though he is not satisfied with this answer, decides to tell more or less what happened. In his case, he says he became curious about blood manipulation when he saw Naito talk about it. And since he is also an Oni, Shiki says he just copied him and thus managed to reverse the frenzy mode calmly. But hearing Shiki's talk, Naito refuses to believe that things really happened following his idiotic logic. After all, to manipulate one's own blood, one needs calm and willpower, something Shiki has not yet shown to have. So Naito believes that in his case, Shiki used the explosion of emotions to manipulate the blood practically by force, without using reason, only intuition. Although this explosive characteristic can be a defect, Naito says that at the same time, the individual is capable of unleashing an extremely powerful explosive power. Therefore, Naito finds himself not knowing what to do about the boy. As for Shiki, he guarantees he'll absorb everything Naito teaches him. After all, he's still got his father's revenge firmly in mind, and once he's finally learned everything Naito has to teach, Shiki believes he'll be considered useful. However, Naito still refuses to take him on as a subordinate, pointing out that the kid risked his own life without a shred of caution. Therefore, Naito makes it clear he has no intention of making him his subordinate. Instead, he'll be his student. Hearing this, Shiki is utterly bewildered, but Naito reaffirms what he just said, telling him the kid passed his test. And since he's already accepted him as a student, Naito decides to drop the mystery and reveals they're currently on Onigashima, also known as the Gate of Hell. At the island's center is Hax, a school exclusively for Onis, where they're trained to face the Momotaros. Hearing he's on an island, Shiki is startled. However, Naito says that's the least important part. Shiki should focus his attention on the Oni Academy, because that's where he'll learn to manipulate his blood correct, learn battle techniques, and get a basic education. Naito even says he'll be his responsible teacher at the academy and will train him so the kid can face the Momotaros more efficiently. As he speaks, Shiki feels his head about to explode with all the new information he's receiving. Naito, ever the charmer, quips that his brain must really be the size of a walnut. Shiki, despite the insult, lets it slide, only asking if he'll get strong enough to take down his father's killer. Naito replies that it's entirely up to the kid himself. Hearing this, Shiki gets a bit more excited. However, Naito makes it clear that if he starts being useless, he'll be expelled from the academy and lose the chance to get stronger. Shiki, confident, says he'll ace it. And as soon as he arrives in the classroom, Shiki is kicked into the room like an animal. He lands face first on the floor, his nose gushing blood. Seeing this, one of his classmates tears a page from a book and hands it to Shiki to wipe his nose. And this other classmate starts to despise Shiki, sparking his anger. Naito quickly goes to the two of them and makes them stop fighting. And having done that, he proposes an Oni hunt game for the class, and then takes them to the forest, the location where the game will take place. In this game, the students must return to school without being captured by him. Otherwise, any student who is captured will be immediately expelled from the school. Hearing this, Shiki notes that the professor always threatens them with expulsion, something he finds totally uncomfortable. However, Naito reminds him that this is just a final test. Things will really get worse when they face the Momotaro organization. As for the forest game, Naito says they should go at him with the intention of killing him. Although he sees everyone willing to do so, Naito notices Shiki is a bit strained and asks if he's thinking of giving up. Hearing this, the boy gets irritated and says he would never give up, especially after a man challenged him for real. Look, you're about to get your ass kicked so hard, you won't know what hit you when you wake up. And that's where the video ends. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching. See you next time.